Imagine this. A quiet afternoon at an elite private school where children of the wealthiest families study. The sun was warm, the garden was calm, but suddenly the air was broken by cruel laughter. A group of kids had circled a young boy in a wheelchair, mocking him, pointing at him, calling him names. And in the middle of that chaos, a woman in a simple uniform dropped her cleaning supplies and ran across the yard like a storm. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a student's parent. She was the billionaire's maid. And what she did next silenced the entire school. The story begins. Her name was Grace. Everyone at the school knew her as the Maid, the woman, who drove the billionaire's disabled son to school and stayed nearby in case he needed help. Grace had dark skin, strong hands from years of work, and eyes that carried both pain and fire. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. But in that moment, she was the only one brave enough to step in. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice sharp as glass. The bullies froze, surprised that someone like her would dare speak up. But Grace didn't care about their shock. She saw the boy, Ethan, hunched in his wheelchair, trying to hide his face. His knuckles were white from gripping the chair handles. His cheeks were wet, not just from tears, but from humiliation. Grace's heart twisted. She knew this wasn't the first time. She stormed toward the group, her shoes crunching on the gravel. The children, sons and daughters of CEOs, politicians, and lawyers, looked at her as if she were out of place. And in truth, she was. This was a school where luxury cars lined the gates, where tuition cost more than some people's yearly salary. Grace, the maid, was never meant to stand in the center of its perfect lawns. But there she was. She knelt beside Ethan and put her hand on his shoulder. "You don't deserve this," she whispered softly. Ethan's trembling stopped. For the first time that day, he looked up and met her eyes. Then Grace turned to the bullies. Her face was calm, but her voice carried thunder. "Do you feel strong picking on someone who can't even stand to defend himself?" The kids shuffled, awkward. But one of them, a tall boy with slicked back hair, clearly used to getting his way, snorted. "Why do you care? You're just the maid. This school is for people like us." The word maid cut through the air like an insult. But Grace didn't flinch. She stood tall, her shadow stretching across the grass. "Maybe I am a maid, but today I'm also the wall between you and him. And if you want to keep hurting him," she stepped closer, her eyes locked on the tall boy, "you'll have to go through me." Silence fell. Teachers at a distance noticed the scene but hesitated to approach, unsure whether to scold the kids or the woman daring to challenge them. For Ethan, though, that silence was different. For once, it wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of someone fighting for him. The weight of courage. Grace's chest burned with fear. What if she lost her job for this? What if the billionaire, Ethan's father, blamed her for causing trouble? But none of it mattered in that moment. All that mattered was protecting the boy who had never been given a fair chance. Ethan's lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his small hand tugged at her sleeve as if to say thank you. Grace squeezed his fingers gently before facing the bullies again. "Go back to your class," she told them firmly. "You've had your fun. But this ends now." The tall boy sneered, but he stepped back. The others followed, muttering under their breath. And just like that, the crowd dispersed. But Grace knew this wasn't over. Bullies don't just vanish. They come back stronger, louder, crueler. And deep inside, she feared that the next battle would not only be between children, but between her and the entire school system. Sometimes the bravest voice in the room comes from the one who was never meant to be heard. Grace proved that true courage isn't about wealth or power. It's about standing up when everyone else stays silent. And if you believe no child should ever face cruelty alone, let this story remind you, it only takes one person to stand up and change everything. The confrontation on the schoolyard had shaken everyone. But the truth was that the story didn't start there. To understand why Grace, the maid, risked everything to protect Ethan, you have to know what life was really like behind the billionaire's mansion gates. Ethan was born into wealth. His father, Charles Donovan, was one of the richest men in the state, a man whose name was whispered in business circles, who had his face in magazines, whose decisions could make or break companies overnight. To the world, Charles was untouchable, powerful, perfect. But inside his mansion, perfection was a myth. Ethan had been born with a disability. His legs had never worked the way other children's did. Doctors explained it in medical terms, neurological issues, muscle weakness. But to Ethan, it simply meant one thing: he couldn't run, couldn't climb, couldn't play like other kids. Charles, for all his power, didn't know how to handle that. A man who conquered boardrooms and crushed competition was suddenly faced with something he couldn't control: his own son's fragility. At first, he tried to hide it. He bought Ethan the most advanced wheelchair money could buy. He hired the best tutors, the most expensive therapists. He paid for private doctors who promised miracles. But no matter how much money Charles threw at the problem, Ethan remained the same, a boy who would never walk. For a billionaire who measured success by victories, it felt like failure. And maybe that's why he often looked at Ethan with eyes that seemed distant. Loving, yes, in his own cold way, but also filled with frustration. Grace came into the Donovan household by accident. She wasn't hired through some agency that specialized in luxury staff. She wasn't chosen for her polished background or her ability to blend into the glittering world of the elite. She was hired because one day, Charles's assistant mentioned they needed someone trustworthy, discreet, and hardworking. Grace fit the description. She was a single mother whose own child had died years ago from illness. She carried that pain quietly, never speaking of it. But when she first saw Ethan, sitting small and fragile in his wheelchair, something in her heart recognized him. It wasn't pity. It was connection, a bond deeper than words. Where others saw a disabled boy, Grace saw a child still yearning to be loved, still needing someone to believe in him. She didn't just clean the mansion. She cooked meals Ethan actually liked, not just the ones the chefs prepared because they were nutritious. She told him stories at night when his father was away at business meetings. She learned how to push his wheelchair in a way that didn't make him feel helpless, but instead made him feel like they were on adventures together. Slowly, Ethan began to smile more around her than he ever did with anyone else. When Ethan turned 10, Charles decided he needed to attend a prestigious school. Not because Ethan wanted it, but because Charles couldn't stand the whispers. People had started asking, "Why doesn't your son go to school like other children? Is he too weak? Too special?" Charles's pride couldn't allow that. So Ethan was enrolled in Westbridge Academy, the school where the richest of the rich sent their kids, a school where competition was fierce. Appearances were everything, and kindness was often a stranger. Grace was ordered to accompany Ethan every day. Officially, her job was to drive him there and back to ensure his needs were met. Unofficially, she became his shield. Every morning, she walked through those marble halls with him, her uniform setting her apart from the parents in suits and silk dresses. She didn't care. She held her head high, pushing his chair past the stares and whispers. But Ethan noticed. He noticed how kids looked at him differently, how some giggled behind their hands, how others avoided him altogether, as if his disability was contagious. And when the bullying started, it wasn't loud at first. It was whispers, a snicker when he dropped a pencil, a cruel nickname scribbled on the back of his notebook. Grace saw it all, and though she tried to comfort Ethan, she also knew something darker was brewing. At home, Ethan barely spoke. He hid in his books, in his drawings, in the quiet corners of the mansion. Grace often found him sketching superheroes, strong, powerful figures who could fly or run without limits. When she asked which one was his favorite, he always pointed to the one in a wheelchair but with wings. "That's me," he said once, his voice small but firm. "I can't run, but maybe I can fly." Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. She never told him her own son once said the same thing. To the billionaire, Ethan was another responsibility, a problem to manage. But to Grace, he was family. And when she saw the bruises, not physical but emotional, the hollow look in Ethan's eyes after a day at school, she knew she couldn't just be a maid. She had to be his protector. By the time the schoolyard incident happened, Grace had already watched Ethan suffer in silence for months. She'd seen him come home with tear-streaked cheeks, insisting he fell or was just tired. She knew those excuses. She'd heard them before from children too afraid to speak the truth. Grace wanted to confront the teachers, but Ethan begged her not to. "It'll just make it worse," he whispered. So she stayed quiet. Until that day. Until the laughter, the mocking voices, the sight of Ethan trembling in his wheelchair while cruel words pierced him like knives. That was the day Grace's silence broke. When the world looks away, when the powerful stay silent, it takes someone ordinary to do something extraordinary. Grace wasn't rich. She wasn't important in the eyes of the school. But she had courage. And sometimes courage is worth more than all the money in the world. If you believe that every child deserves to feel safe and valued, let Grace's story remind you. Never underestimate the power of standing beside someone who feels alone. Bullying rarely begins with fists. It begins with whispers, soft enough that teachers pretend not to hear, sharp enough that the victim feels every word like a blade. For Ethan, those whispers started on his very first week at Westbridge Academy. And for Grace, who watched from the sidelines, each day felt like standing on the edge of a storm she knew was about to break. The first cuts. Ethan rolled his wheelchair into the classroom, his books neatly stacked in his lap. His smile was small but hopeful. He wanted to believe this new school might be different, but hope didn't last long. "Don't run him over," one boy snickered as Ethan passed. The class laughed. Ethan froze, his knuckles white around the chair's wheels. Grace, waiting just outside the classroom door as she always did, caught the sound. She leaned in, her eyes searching her boy's face. Ethan forced a smile, pretending he didn't hear. But Grace had raised enough children, her own and others, to know the truth. Silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it means pain too deep to share. The names. It started with one cruel nickname, Wheels. At first, it was whispered, almost like a joke between two boys in the back row. But soon it spread like wildfire. Every time Ethan rolled by, he heard it hissed under someone's breath. "Hey, Wheels, you forgot your brakes." "Careful, Wheels might roll away." "Don't trip over Wheels." Each insult chipped away at Ethan's confidence. Grace saw the change. His drawings became darker, his smiles rarer. At night, she'd hear him mumbling in his sleep, "I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back." But she couldn't keep him home, his father, Charles, insisted. "He has to toughen up. Life won't go easy on him just because of his legs." Grace wanted to scream, "He's just a boy!" But she didn't. She kept silent, for Ethan's sake, for her job's sake. The teacher's blindness. What hurt most wasn't just the bullies. It was the silence of the adults who should have known better. The teacher saw Ethan being left out of group projects, his wheelchair pushed into the far corner during games, his name absent from the birthday invitations that floated around the class. They saw it and ignored it. "He needs to learn independence," one teacher told Grace when she quietly asked about Ethan's struggles. "We can't shield him forever." Independence? Grace thought bitterly. There's a difference between independence and isolation. The cruel games. By winter, the bullying had grown bolder. One afternoon, Ethan returned from recess with mud splattered on his trousers. When Grace bent down to clean it, she noticed streaks not just on the fabric, but on his wheelchair tires, too. "What happened?" she asked gently. Ethan's lips trembled. "Nothing. I rolled into the grass." But Grace wasn't fooled. Later, she overheard two boys laughing in the hall. "Did you see his chair sink into the mud? He couldn't even move. We told him the ramp was closed, and he believed it." Her blood boiled. They hadn't just teased him, they had trapped him. That night, Grace sat by Ethan's bed. "Ethan," she whispered, "you know you can tell me anything, right?" He turned his face to the wall. "If I tell, they'll just hurt me more." Her heart cracked. This was the silent prison of bullying, the fear that speaking up would only make the pain worse. Grace's quiet watch. From then on, Grace's eyes were sharper. She stood at the edges of the playground, pretending to tidy Ethan's things while secretly watching the kids who circled him like wolves. She saw how he was always picked last for games, how his friends laughed at him, then walked away when he needed help. How even at lunch, the other kids would slide their chairs away, leaving him sitting alone at the end of the table. Grace wrote everything down in a small notebook she carried in her apron pocket. Dates, times, incidents, her own quiet record of injustice. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet. But one day, she told herself, she'd need proof. The spark of anger. One cold morning, Ethan came home from school, quieter than usual. Grace noticed his hands shaking as he tried to eat dinner. "What happened?" she pressed. Finally, his eyes filled with tears. "They locked my wheels." Grace froze. "What do you mean?" "They tied my wheels with rope when the teacher wasn't looking. I couldn't move until someone came." His voice cracked. Everyone laughed. Grace's hand tightened around her spoon. For the first time in years, she wanted to march straight into that school and unleash her fury. But she looked at Ethan's fragile face, the way he shrank into himself, and she swallowed her rage. Not yet, she told herself, but soon. The quiet hero. Every day, Grace became more than a maid. She became Ethan's shadow, his protector, his silent hero. She was there to wipe his tears, to tell him stories where the heroes didn't need legs to fly, where strength came from courage, not muscles. And every day, she grew more certain. If no one else would stand up for Ethan, she would. The storm was building. Grace could feel it. And when it finally broke, the entire school would never forget. Bullying doesn't always leave bruises you can see. Sometimes the deepest scars are invisible, the ones carved into a child's heart. Ethan's pain was ignored by those with power, but Grace saw it. She refused to let silence win. And if you've ever stood by while someone was hurt, let this story remind you, silence protects the bully, not the victim. Be the voice that says enough. Every story has a moment when silence can no longer hold back the truth. For Ethan, that moment came on a gray Thursday afternoon, when laughter turned into cruelty so sharp it could no longer be ignored. And for Grace, it was the moment she stopped being just the maid and became a warrior. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the playground looked dull under the dim light. Kids rushed out after class, their voices echoing across the yard. Ethan stayed behind, slowly pushing his wheelchair over the uneven pavement. He hated this part of the day, recess, because it always meant being reminded of what he couldn't do. Grace, as always, kept a watchful distance. She carried a bag of snacks Ethan liked and pretended to be busy near a bench. But her eyes never left him. Then she saw them, the group of boys who had made Ethan their favorite target. Led by Marcus, the tall, confident son of a wealthy lawyer, they walked with swagger. Grace had seen that walk before. The walk of kids who thought the world belonged to them. Marcus smirked as he approached Ethan. "Hey, Wheels," he called out. "Want to play tag? Oh, wait. You can't run." The other boys burst into laughter. Ethan lowered his head, his hands trembling on his lap. But Marcus wasn't finished. He grabbed a ball from another student and tossed it into Ethan's lap. "Here, catch! Let's see if you can even throw." Ethan didn't move. The ball rolled off his legs and onto the ground. "Wow," Marcus sneered. "He can't even hold a ball." What a joke. This time, the laughter was louder. Other kids joined in, not because they hated Ethan, but because they were afraid of Marcus. Better to laugh with the bully than risk becoming the next target. Grace felt her blood run hot. Her fists clenched around the snack bag. She wanted to storm in right then, but she hesitated. She remembered Ethan begging her not to make things worse. But then Marcus did something that changed everything. Marcus stepped behind Ethan's wheelchair. Before Grace could even move, he shoved it forward hard. The chair jolted, the wheels rattled over the rough ground, and Ethan cried out as he struggled to stop himself from tipping. The world froze for Grace. In that single moment, she didn't see Ethan, the billionaire's son, the boy in the wheelchair. She saw her own child, the son she lost years ago, falling, frightened, powerless, and something inside her snapped. "Enough!" Grace's voice cut through the playground like a whip. Everyone turned. Teachers on the far side of the yard froze. Students stopped mid-laughter. Marcus and his friends looked stunned. Grace was already running. She dropped the bag of snacks, her shoes pounding against the concrete, her eyes blazing with fury. In seconds, she was at Ethan's side, her hands gripping the handles of his chair, pulling him back to safety. Her chest heaved as she spun to face Marcus. "How dare you!" she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. Marcus blinked, taken aback. "What, we were just playing—" "Playing?" Grace's voice cracked. "Is that what you call humiliating a child who can't fight back? Shoving him around like he's nothing? You think that makes you strong?" The entire playground had gone silent. Kids stared wide-eyed, whispering to each other. No one had ever spoken to Marcus like that. Marcus tried to laugh it off. "You don't get it. You're just the maid. Stay out of it." The word maid stung, but Grace stood taller. "Yes, I am the maid. And that means I know what it's like to be looked down on. But it also means I know something you don't." She stepped closer, her voice steady, almost shaking with passion. "Real strength isn't about tearing people down. It's about lifting them up. And if you can't understand that, then you're weaker than the boy you're trying to bully." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus's face turned red, his confidence cracking under her words. For Ethan, who had been shrinking in his chair moments ago, it was like watching a superhero appear out of nowhere. Grace wasn't wearing a cape. She didn't have powers, but she had something stronger, courage. Teachers finally rushed over, their voices raised, asking what happened. Marcus muttered excuses. It was just a joke. She's overreacting, but no one laughed with him this time. The other students stepped back, some even glaring at Marcus, as if finally realizing he wasn't as untouchable as they thought. Grace knelt beside Ethan, brushing his hair from his face. "You're safe," she whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Ethan's eyes glistened. For the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. By the end of that day, word of the confrontation had spread through the entire school. Kids whispered about how the maid had stood up to Marcus, how she had silenced the loudest bully in Westbridge Academy. Some students admired her. Others were shocked. Teachers didn't know what to think. And Marcus? His pride was shattered. But Grace knew this wasn't over. Marcus's father was a powerful lawyer, and in a school like this, power meant everything. She had protected Ethan today, but tomorrow the battle might be even bigger. Sometimes the world tells you to stay in your place, to keep quiet, to let things slide. But Grace showed us something different. When a child is in danger, silence is betrayal. Courage doesn't wait for permission. It rises when it's needed most. If you believe no title, no job, no label defines the value of a human being, let Grace's stand remind you. Real strength is standing up for the weak, even when the world tells you not to. Every act of courage comes with a price. The moment Grace stood up for Ethan, she knew she had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. The truth was out in the open now, and whispers travel faster than wildfire inside walls built on wealth and pride. What started as one act of protection was about to shake the entire school, and the Billionaire family itself. By the next morning, Westbridge Academy felt different. The polished marble halls, usually filled with careless chatter, carried only hushed whispers. Groups of students huddled together, their voices low but urgent. They said she yelled at Marcus. No, she didn't just yell, she called him weak. And she's the maid? The story had grown larger with every retelling. Grace was no longer just the maid. She was the woman who had stood in the middle of the playground, fearlessly calling out the biggest bully in school. Some kids admired her. They wanted to clap for her, even thank her for saying the words they'd been too scared to speak. But others looked nervous. Marcus's family wasn't just rich, they were powerful. In a corner of the cafeteria, Marcus sat with his closest friends, his jaw clenched, his pride still burning from yesterday's humiliation. Every time he heard someone whisper, his face grew redder. "She embarrassed me," Marcus spat. "In front of everyone, a maid. Who does she think she is?" His friends shifted uncomfortably. They weren't laughing now. Yesterday, Marcus had been untouchable. Today, even his shadow seemed smaller. "She's going to pay for this," Marcus said, slamming his fist on the table. "No one talks to me like that, especially not her." Grace, meanwhile, tried to move quietly through the school. She helped Ethan with his books, made sure he reached his classes and kept her head down. But she could feel the eyes on her, the stares from students, the questioning looks from teachers. One teacher pulled her aside. "Grace," she whispered, "I know your heart was in the right place. But be careful. Families like Marcus's, they don't forgive easily." Grace nodded, though inside fear twisted in her stomach. She hadn't thought about Marcus's parents, not yet. She had only thought about Ethan, about protecting him. But now reality was sinking in. At lunch, Ethan looked up at her, his small hands gripping his tray. "Grace," he said softly, "thank you for what you did." Her heart softened. "I'll always protect you, Ethan, that's my promise." But Ethan hesitated. His eyes darted around the cafeteria nervously. Marcus is mad. And when Marcus is mad, his dad gets involved. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. Grace knelt beside him. Listen to me. This isn't your fault. You never have to apologize for needing someone to stand up for you. If trouble comes, I'll face it. But deep inside, Grace wondered how long she could keep that promise. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, Marcus's father was already waiting at the school office. Tall, sharp-suited, with an expression carved in stone, Mr. Caldwell looked every bit the lawyer who could tear a courtroom, apart with words alone. The principal greeted him nervously. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for coming. I heard my son was humiliated yesterday, Mr. Caldwell said coldly. His voice was calm, but there was danger in it. By a maid. Yes, well, there was an incident, the principal stammered. We're reviewing it. I don't need a review, Mr. Caldwell snapped. I need accountability. My son's reputation was damaged. That woman had no authority to interfere with students. Grace, standing outside the office with Ethan, felt her chest tighten as she overheard. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she couldn't move her feet. Every word cut deeper. Later that evening, when Ethan's father, the billionaire, arrived home, Grace knew she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. He walked into the grand living room, his expression calm as always, his suit flawless, his voice steady. Grace, he said, I heard something happened at school. Her hands trembled as she set down the laundry basket. Yes, sir, Marcus's father called me, he interrupted. He's furious. He says you humiliated his son in front of the school. Grace's heart pounded. Sir, with all due respect, I didn't humiliate him. I protected Ethan. Marcus shoved his wheelchair. He could have been hurt. I couldn't stay silent. For the first time, the billionaire's eyes softened. He looked at his son, sitting quietly in his chair, avoiding his gaze. Ethan, is that true? Ethan nodded slowly. She saved me, Dad. Marcus was being cruel. She was the only one who helped. Silence hung in the room. The billionaire glanced between Grace and Ethan, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Grace, you may have complicated things. Marcus's family is powerful, and this could become ugly. But, he paused, his voice dropping lower. Thank you. For protecting my son when no one else did. Grace blinked back tears. It wasn't a full shield against the storm that was coming. But in that moment, she knew she had earned something rare. The respect of the man who had once looked at her only as the help. But respect wouldn't stop Marcus's father. It wouldn't stop the rumors. It wouldn't stop the anger of a boy whose pride had been shattered. Grace knew this fight was only beginning. And the next battle wouldn't be on a playground. It would be in places where power, money, and influence mattered most. Sometimes standing up for what's right means standing in the line of fire. Grace didn't choose this battle. She chose Ethan. And when you choose to protect the vulnerable, the powerful will always push back. Remember this, true courage isn't about winning the easy fights. It's about facing the ones that could cost you everything, and still saying, I won't back down. When money and power collide with truth, justice doesn't always win. At Westbridge Academy, everyone knew one fact. The Caldwells could bend the rules, bend the people, even bend the school itself. And now, Grace, the maid who dared to protect a disabled boy, was standing in their way. The question wasn't just about right and wrong anymore. It was about survival. 2 days after the incident, Grace received a notice. She was to attend a disciplinary meeting at the school. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She wasn't a student. She wasn't a teacher. She was just Ethan's caretaker. But the letter was clear. You are required to appear to discuss your conduct during the recent incident involving Marcus Caldwell. Her stomach sank. This wasn't just gossip anymore. It was formal. Ethan tried to comfort her. You don't have to go. Dad won't let them punish you. But Grace shook her head. If they want to talk, I'll go. I have nothing to hide. Still, her heart raced with fear. On Friday morning, Grace walked into the conference room. The air was thick with tension. At the long, polished table sat the principal, 2 teachers, Marcus and his father, and finally Ethan's father, the billionaire. Marcus's father sat tall, his expensive watch catching the light, his smirk confident. Grace could feel the weight of his glare, sharp and cold. Let's begin, the principal said nervously. We're here to discuss the unfortunate events that happened in the schoolyard. Unfortunate? Mr. Caldwell sneered. My son was publicly humiliated by a maid. A maid? Do you realize the damage to his reputation? Do you realize the precedent this sets if you allow outsiders to scold students? Grace clenched her fists under the table. She wanted to speak, but the principal gestured for her to wait. Marcus sat back in his chair, smirking. She yelled at me in front of everyone. She called me weak. Everyone laughs at me now. She ruined my life. That's enough, Grace finally said, her voice trembling but firm. What I said was the truth. You pushed Ethan's wheelchair. He could have been hurt. You laughed while he struggled. You weren't the victim, Marcus. Ethan was. The room fell silent. Mr. Caldwell slammed his palm on the table. This is exactly the problem. She doesn't know her place. My son doesn't answer to a servant. This school doesn't answer to her either. If you don't remove her from this campus, I will see to it that Westbridge loses its donors. And believe me, without Caldwell support, this school will collapse. The principal turned pale. He looked torn, caught between money and morality. All eyes turned to Ethan's father. He sat quietly, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. Grace looked at him, silently begging for support. Ethan clutched the arm of his wheelchair, waiting for his father's words. But the billionaire remained silent. The silence hurt more than the insults. Grace lowered her eyes. Was he ashamed of her? Was he going to side with the Caldwells to protect his own reputation? Finally, a small voice spoke. Ethan. His voice shook, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Stop blaming her. She saved me. The adults froze. Ethan rarely spoke in public, especially not in front of Marcus. But now his voice was louder, braver. Marcus pushed my wheelchair. He wanted me to fall. Grace stopped him. She's the only one who ever stands up for me. If you punish her, you're saying I don't matter. You're saying bullies can do whatever they want. Tears welled in his eyes. Please, just stop. The room fell silent again, this time for a different reason. No one had expected Ethan to speak, let alone so powerfully. The principal cleared his throat awkwardly. We appreciate Ethan's perspective, but we must consider all sides. Grace, perhaps you could apologize to Marcus for the way you spoke? Grace's jaw dropped. Apologize? To the boy who had nearly hurt Ethan? Before she could respond, Marcus's father leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Yes, an apology will do. Admit she was wrong, and we can put this behind us. Grace's heart pounded. Every fiber of her being screamed against it. Apologize for protecting a child? For doing what was right? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling, and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. I will not apologize. Not now, not ever. You hurt Ethan. You mocked his disability. If I had stayed silent, you would have done it again. I don't care about your money, your reputation, or your threats. I care about that. Boy, she pointed to Ethan, and I will protect him every single time. The room froze. The principal's face went pale. Marcus's father's eyes burned with fury. You'll regret this, he hissed. Maybe she would. But Grace didn't flinch. As the meeting ended, Mr. Caldwell stormed out, dragging Marcus behind him. The principal avoided Grace's eyes, already calculating the fallout. The billionaire finally stood. He walked past Grace, paused, and said quietly, "That took courage." Then he left the room. Grace's knees nearly buckled. Was that support, or just an observation? She didn't know. But one thing was certain. The fight was far from over. When the powerful try to silence the truth, it takes more than words to resist. It takes courage. Grace could have bowed her head, apologized, and walked away quietly. But she stood firm, not for herself, but for a boy who had no voice. Remember this. Real strength isn't measured by money, titles, or influence. It's measured by how far you'll go to protect someone who can't protect themselves. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest power. Ethan's trembling words during that meeting weren't just a defense, they were a spark. a spark that began to burn through the polished walls of Westbridge Academy, threatening to expose everything the powerful wanted to hide. But with every spark comes the risk of fire, and fire, once it spreads, doesn't ask permission. The day after the meeting, whispers filled every classroom and hallway, not just about Grace this time, but about Ethan. "Did you hear?" Ethan finally spoke up. He told everyone what Marcus did. They said Grace refused to apologize. The story spread faster than the teachers could contain it. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just the boy in the wheelchair. He was the boy who had stood up, trembling but determined to tell the truth. Grace walked beside him, sensing the shift. Some students smiled at Ethan for the first time, offering him nods of quiet respect. Others avoided his eyes, afraid to be caught on the wrong side. But one thing was clear. The silence around Marcus's cruelty was broken. In the locker room, Marcus fumed. His face was red, his fists clenched. He thinks he's brave now? He thinks people respect him. His voice cracked with fury. "I'll make sure nobody listens to him ever again." One of his friends hesitated. Maybe you should let it go, Marcus. People are talking. Even the teachers are—" "Shut up," Marcus snapped. "This isn't over. If the maid won't shut her mouth, I'll shut his." It wasn't just anger anymore. It was vengeance. Meanwhile, Grace's position at the mansion grew more complicated. Some of the staff whispered that she was reckless, that she had put herself in danger. Others admired her quietly but warned her to be careful. Even Ethan's father seemed conflicted. He never scolded her, but he never praised her openly either. He was a man of power and silence, watching every move with unreadable eyes. Grace often wondered if he was waiting to see which way the wind would blow, toward Marcus's family or toward the truth. At night, alone in her small room, she thought about quitting. She could walk away, find another job, avoid the storm. But every time she imagined leaving, she saw Ethan's face, the way his small hand clutched her sleeve when he was scared, the way his eyes lit up when she told him he mattered. She couldn't walk away. Not now. At school, Ethan surprised everyone again. During a class discussion about courage, he raised his hand, a rare act in itself. His voice was quiet but steady. "Courage isn't about being the strongest," he said. "It's about standing up when you're scared. It's about helping someone even if everyone else is against you." The room fell silent. The teacher blinked, almost stunned. And for once, Ethan wasn't invisible. He wasn't ignored. He was heard. Grace, standing just outside the classroom door, wiped a tear from her eye. But not everyone was inspired. The principal, caught between donors and truth, grew increasingly anxious. He called Grace into his office. "You need to understand, Grace," he said, his voice tight. "This situation is bigger than you think. Marcus's family gives more money to this school than anyone else. If they pull their funding, teachers lose jobs, students lose programs. I'm asking you as kindly as I can, please step back. Keep your head down." Grace clenched her fists. "With respect, sir, what happens to Ethan if I step back? Who stands up for him then? Money can build buildings, but it can't buy kindness. It can't replace a broken boy's spirit." The principal looked away, ashamed. But he said nothing more. Parents began to hear whispers, too. Some were outraged. "Did you hear? A maid is causing chaos at the school." Others were quietly supportive. Maybe it's about time someone spoke up about Marcus. Everyone knows he bullies kids. But one thing was certain. The story had grown too big to contain. And when stories grow, they eventually demand an ending. That evening, Grace found Ethan sitting quietly in the garden, staring at the stars. She sat beside him. "Do you regret speaking up?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm scared. But I don't regret it." He glanced at her. "Do you regret yelling at Marcus?" She laughed quietly. "Not for a second." Ethan smiled, then grew serious. "Grace, if they make you leave, I don't know what I'll do." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, listen to me. No matter what happens, you're stronger than you think. Your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone take it away again. Promise me." His eyes filled with tears. "I promise." The warning. As they walked back inside, Grace found a note slipped under her door. It wasn't signed, but the message was chilling. "You've made powerful enemies. Walk away before it's too late." Grace's blood ran cold. She folded the note, tucked it away, and whispered to herself, "They think they can scare me. But they don't know me. Fear is the weapon of the powerful. They whisper, they threaten, they try to make you small. But here's the truth. Fear only works if you let it. Don't let fear silence you. Your voice might be the spark someone else needs to find their courage. And sometimes that spark is all it takes to change everything. Every bully has a breaking point. And when pride is wounded, when reputation is scarred, power doesn't just push back, it strikes with full force. Marcus and his family weren't finished with Grace. They had waited, watched, and now they were ready to crush her, no matter who got hurt in the process. It came on a Monday morning, a thick envelope hand-delivered to the mansion. Grace wasn't even meant to see it, but she caught a glimpse on the dining table before the butler carried it upstairs. On the front, in bold letters, were the words, "Formal legal notice." Her heart sank. She didn't need to open it to know who it came from, the Caldwells. That night, she overheard the billionaire on the phone, his voice unusually sharp. "No, Caldwell, listen to me. My son's safety is not negotiable. If you think you can threaten my household, you're mistaken." He ended the call abruptly. Grace stayed hidden in the hallway, her pulse racing. She had never heard him speak like that before. Cold, furious, protective. The next day at school, the strike came in full. Grace was stopped at the front office before she could even escort Ethan to class. The secretary looked nervous. "I'm sorry, Miss Grace, but you're no longer permitted on school grounds until further notice." Grace froze. "What? Why?" "The board made a decision," the secretary whispered. "There's a legal complaint. They're saying you created a hostile environment for Marcus Caldwell." "A hostile environment? For stopping bullying?" Grace's chest tightened. She looked at Ethan, who was gripping his wheelchair handles in panic. "You can't take her away," Ethan cried. "She's the only one who protects me." The secretary's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Orders are orders." Tears spilled down Ethan's face as Grace knelt beside him. "Don't cry," she whispered, though her own voice broke. "I'll still be here for you no matter what. They can't keep me away forever." But Ethan wasn't convinced. He clutched her sleeve so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Don't let them take you. Please, Grace, don't leave me." The sight nearly shattered her. In that moment, she didn't care about rules or notices. She cared about him. But the guards were already watching. She had to step back. That evening, the mansion was different. The billionaire, usually calm and controlled, was pacing the floor like a storm contained in human form. "Grace," he said firmly, "they've crossed a line." She hesitated. "Sir, maybe it's best if I step back. I don't want to bring more trouble to Ethan." He stopped and turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Grace, listen to me. You think this is about you? It's not. It's about Ethan. If you step back, if you give in, what message do we send him? That money and power always win? That he's too small to fight for? No, not in my house." Grace blinked. For the first time, she saw not just a wealthy businessman, but a father, furious, protective, unafraid. The next day, an emergency school board meeting was called. Parents packed the room, whispers buzzing like angry bees. On one side sat Mr. Caldwell and his son, smug and ready. On the other, Ethan and his father, with Grace quietly standing behind them. Mr. Caldwell rose first. His voice dripped with authority. "This school has allowed chaos. A servant has humiliated my son, damaged his reputation, and disrupted the environment. If this isn't addressed immediately, the Caldwell family will withdraw every cent of funding. And believe me, without us, this institution will crumble." The room fell silent. The principal looked ready to cave, but then Ethan's father stood. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice, steady and commanding, filled the room. "My son," he said, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, "was bullied. He was mocked for his disability. He was shoved in his wheelchair. Not by a stranger, not by an adult, but by Marcus Caldwell. And when no teacher, no administrator, and no student had the courage to stop it, one woman did. Grace." The billionaire's eyes swept across the room. "And now you want to punish her? For protecting a child? For protecting my child? If that's the kind of justice you offer, then maybe it's not my son who doesn't belong here. Maybe it's this entire system that's broken." A stunned silence followed. For the first time, Marcus's smirk faltered. Parents shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered, nodding. Others looked at Marcus's father with disapproval. The tide was turning. Grace could feel it. The billionaire continued. "You talk about funding, Caldwell. You threaten to pull your money? Fine, pull it. I'll fund this school myself if I have to. But let me be perfectly clear. This woman stays, and so does my son." Gasps filled the room. Grace's heart stopped. He had said it publicly, unshakable, undeniable support. Marcus's father turned red with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You'll regret crossing me." The billionaire didn't flinch. "I don't bow to bullies. Not the ones in the schoolyard. And not the ones in suits." The room erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. But one thing was certain. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no going back. That night, as Grace tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. "You're not leaving?" She smiled, brushing his hair gently. "No, Ethan, I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever." And for the first time since the fight began, Grace felt something she hadn't dared to hope for. They weren't standing alone anymore. Power can threaten, money can control. But when truth stands tall, even giants can be shaken. Grace thought she was just a maid, powerless against wealth and influence. But courage paired with the right voice can move mountains. Remember this. Never underestimate the power of standing by someone who can't stand alone. Sometimes that choice doesn't just protect one life, it changes an entire community. Sometimes battles aren't won in secret. Sometimes they happen in the open, under the eyes of everyone who once chose silence. And when the truth finally breaks free, there's no stopping it. For Grace, Ethan, and the billionaire father, this was the moment that would decide everything, whether power would silence justice, or whether courage would finally win. The morning after the meeting, the mansion was strangely quiet. Grace woke early, still shaken from the boardroom storm. Ethan's father had stood tall, but she knew the Caldwells weren't the kind to back down quietly. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw Ethan already at the table, his sketchbook open. He was drawing, not superheroes this time, but a boy in a wheelchair with a maid standing beside him. Underneath, in his messy handwriting, he had written, "They can't hurt us anymore." Grace's throat tightened. She squeezed his shoulder. "That's beautiful, Ethan." He looked up at her, determination in his eyes. "Grace, I want to go back to school today. I don't care what Marcus says. I'm not hiding anymore." Walking into the school felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Grace pushed Ethan's wheelchair while the halls buzzed with whispers. Some students avoided their gaze, but others actually smiled. One boy approached and muttered, "Hey, Ethan, you're brave, man." Ethan blinked in shock. It was the first time another student had spoken to him kindly in public. Grace caught the moment and stored it in her heart. Change was starting. But Marcus wasn't done. He stood at the far end of the hallway, arms crossed, smirk sharp as ever. His friends flanked him, but something was different. Fewer of them. A couple had already slipped away, no longer willing to risk being on the wrong side. "Look who crawled back," Marcus sneered. "Did Daddy buy you some courage?" Ethan clenched the armrest of his wheelchair. His lips trembled, but instead of shrinking back, he spoke. "No, Grace gave me courage. And my dad. And guess what, Marcus? You don't scare me anymore." The hallway froze. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus's face went red. Marcus lunged forward, hand reaching for Ethan's wheelchair. But before he could touch it, another hand caught his wrist. He had walked in silently, but now his voice thundered, "Enough!" The entire hallway fell into silence. Marcus's wrist shook in the billionaire's grip as he struggled. But the man's hold was unbreakable. "You lay one more finger on my son," the billionaire said coldly. "And I promise you, Marcus, not even your father's money will protect you." Gasps erupted. Teachers rushed in. For the first time, Marcus looked small. Cornered, not the predator but the prey. By the end of the day, it was over. The board, pressured by parents, removed Marcus from the school indefinitely. His father tried to fight. But the story had spread beyond control. Parents demanding accountability, newspapers picking up whispers of the billionaire versus the bully. Grace watched it unfold, stunned. She had expected punishment, maybe dismissal, maybe worse. But instead, the truth had burned brighter than the lies. The principal called her into the office. "Grace," he said softly, "I owe you an apology. You defended Ethan when we failed. You showed more integrity than anyone here. On behalf of the school, thank you." Grace's eyes watered. She had never been thanked by someone in authority before. She nodded, unable to speak. A week later, the school hosted an assembly. The auditorium filled with parents, students,